everybody, I'm Simmons. This is Philosophy for Where We Find Ourselves, May the 9th, 2020. Why is it that the question being put out across the nation is, when can we reopen? Not, how can we better love our neighbor? Now you might say that's a false dichotomy because it's in the name of loving our neighbor that we are trying to get the economy started to be able to provide for those in need. I don't think that that's a foolish view. However, let's push a little bit on that view and think about why it might be problematic. Right now, there are protests across the country suggesting that somehow we are losing our freedom by being asked to care about our neighbors. When we give in to that libertarian conception of human society, we have actually abandoned neighbor love as a guiding principle of human social organization and instead have grounded our very behavior, our action, and our sense of self purely on an egoistic conception that when I feel okay, it's okay. Here in South Carolina, masks are exceedingly rare when you go out in public. Why? Because there's a narration of masks somehow being a violation of individual liberty. Wow. That the sacrifice of putting on a mask in order to protect the community members with whom you share the world is somehow too great a cost for the sake of democracy. Neighbor love has taken a back seat to our conceptions of economic prosperity. When we make that bargain with the devil, we actually eliminate a conception of a God who models humility, shared sacrifice, and shared joys, and replace it with a conception of God that is authoritatively dictating a particular egoistic model of self in front of others. How do we avoid this? We should listen to the words of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Let him who cannot be alone beware of community. Similarly, let him who is not in community beware of being alone. When we give in to a libertarian model of individualism as the core of some sort of white evangelical conception of Christian existence, when we confuse being a Christian with being an American, when we act as if our own liberty is being challenged by an expectation to care about the very life of others, when we act like the most vulnerable no longer matter because we have to sacrifice them in order for some sort of economic prosperity, we have entirely abandoned a Christian conception of community itself. When Bonhoeffer says that we cannot be alone unless we are in community, what he means is it's in the community that we are invited to have appropriate self-love. But when he says that if we cannot be alone, we can't be in community, he's suggesting that if we are not comfortable enough with ourselves to be able to sit in solitude, that then we have nothing ultimately to offer the community because we've made the community simply a manifestation of our own desire. Now, you might say, well, this is ridiculous. It's precisely in order to help others that we've got to get the economic engines running again. Again, I don't think that's foolish. I think it's misguided and short-sighted. Why? Because when we ask, how do I love my neighbor, rather than how do I make myself feel better by getting back to normal, then we can begin to say the task is not to somehow get back to normal right now. The task is, how can I care for those in need? Listen, in fact, to the author of the book of Acts. This is in Acts 2. It says, all the believers lived in wonderful harmony. Notice, not in isolation, not in radical disparity, not in self-protective reinforcement of their own narrow view of their success requires that the other somehow be suppressed. They lived in wonderful harmony, holding everything in common. They sold whatever they had and pooled their resources so that each person's needs were met. What if instead of talking about what I need, I can start trying to think through what is it I have that I can give to others to make sure that they in fact don't suffer in these difficult times. God is not an individualist. God invites us to be individuals as anchored in communities that recognize loving the neighbor defines us in our very selfhood. For the sake of the widow, the orphan, the stranger, for the sake of the least of our brethren, when we continue to act like the guiding question is an economic question rather than a moral one, when we act as if there is no other way to care for the economic needs of people except via capitalistic, individualistic prosperity gospels, we have made a hash of a Bonhoefferian conception of discipleship and an Acts account of what it looks like to live in community together. Now look, I know a lot of you are going to take issue with today's video, but I'm offering it precisely because philosophy for where we find ourselves means that we can't eviscerate truth in order simply to feel good. We've got to stand in awe of truth in order that we feel the good. I'll see you tomorrow, unless a piano falls on our heads.